We can see.
Okay. Okay, sorry for the disturbance. I don't know what is happening. So, electrolyte disorders are very commonly seen in acutely ill patients, and these disorders vary from patient to patient, and they depend mainly on the clinical characteristics and demographic of the patient. And as we know that the dyselectrolytemia is an independent risk factor for increase in hospital morbidity and mortality. In contrast, we just have a few treatment recommendations which are based on few randomized prospective control trials, and most of the literature is basically most of the studies are retrospective or observational studies, and very few randomized trials are there regarding the treatment. So coming to water and sodium and water balance in your body, and in brief, we will see uh, how one affects the other. So the body is compartmentalized into two parts, as we know that most of our body is made of water, and it is the extracellular compartment comprises of around 1/3 of your body water, and 2/3 is mainly the intracellular. Further, the extracellular compartment is again divided into your vascular, intravascular compartment and interstitial compartment. So traditionally, the first space, what we call is the intracellular space. The second space is your intravascular space, and third, what is traditionally called the third space is your interstitial space. So the body is basically the total body water is distributed amongst these three compartments, and the water is freely permeable to from one compartment to another through the cell membrane, and the electrolyte distribution of these electrolyte in this compartment, as we know that the sodium is the main cation in your extracellular space, while the potassium is your main cation in your intracellular space. To balance the electroneutrality, we have this chloride and bicarbonate anions in acting as a major anions in your extracellular space, while phosphates and proteins are your major anions in your intracellular space. In addition, you have this magnesium, which act as an important component of your intracellular cell metabolism. And the calcium is an important cell messenger, and it is important in various functions of your cell. So, sodium is important for water movement. And as we know, the cell membrane is permeable only to the water, and the solutes cannot pass through it. So, if you consider these two compartments as two compartments, and one with high osmolality or one with low osmolality. So, low osmolality means a dilute compartment where your sodium concentration is low and there is more of it. And high osmolality means that there is a high concentration of solute, and the water content is relatively less. So what happens if the osmolality of one compartment is increased? So there is a passive movement of water across the cell membrane, and the compartment with high osmolality, there is an increase in the volume of that compartment in order to maintain an homeostasis or equal osmolality between the two compartments. So this is the basic principle that sodium, water always follows the sodium. So whenever there are changes, the subsequent water movement will occur in order to maintain your equal osmolality. So sodium basically reflects water balance in your body. So whenever there is a decreased sodium, uh, these two things, whether hyponatremia or hypernatremia, occurs mainly because of the major reason is basically because of your shift of water from one compartment to another compartment, or either a loss of your water or a gain of your water. So rather than actual decrease in the content of sodium or actual increase in your content of sodium, it is usually the most commonly reflects your water movement, right? So whenever there is a hyponatremia, the most common reason is your free water gain. So both the extracellular and intracellular, in both extra and intracellular compartment, your free water will increase, and this will lead to volume in the both the compartment. And the in opposite is for the in cases with hypernatremia. So whenever there is an increase in your sodium concentration in your extracellular fluid, the both intracellular and extracellular volume, there is a decrease in your free water, and it will lead to shrinkage of this compartment. So basically, the sodium reflects your water balance, and although sodium is largely extracellular compartment is largely located in extracellular compartment, and potassium in intracellular compartment. Body fluids can be considered as being in a single tub containing sodium, potassium, and water. And because osmotic gradients are quickly abolished because of this water movement across the free water movement across the cell membrane. So, as said, the concentration of sodium in plasma water should equal the concentration of sodium plus potassium in total body water. So, this diagram just depicts the factors or the internal and external solute and water balance and the plasma sodium concentration. So, the plasma sodium concentration is determined according to the ratio of content of sodium plus potassium in the body, which is the numerator, upon the total body water, so which is the denominator. And this is determined, this concentration is altered by net external balances of sodium, potassium, and water. And basically the intake minus the output of these contents in the body, and the internal sodium balance. So what is internal sodium balance? Internal sodium balance is basically the balance between the free sodium, which is available for exchange, which is exchangeable, and the sodium which is bound to polyanionic proteoglycans, mainly in the stored form like bone, cartilage, and skin. So these can act as a sodium reservoir in certain conditions, right? So this has led to the concept of this Edelman equation, which states that the sodium concentration is a function of total body sodium and potassium, which is exchangeable, and to the total body water is the ratio to the total body water. So whenever there is an increase in total body sodium and potassium, there is a gain of sodium, and also the sodium concentration will increase. And whenever there is a decrease in your total body, there is a loss of free water, and this can also will lead to increase in sodium concentration. So this is the Edelman equation. Coming to the regulation of sodium in the body, it is a complex interplay of between your transporters, various pumps, and cell membrane and water. We will see one by one. So the main mechanism which act is for the regulation of sodium homeostasis in the body is the main organ is the kidney. So the basic function of the kidney, the first priority of the kidney is to conserve sodium, and the second priority is excess free water, and finally to conserve the free water. So how does this kidneys handle your water and sodium in the body? So the urine is basically the ultrafiltrate of your plasma from the glomerulus. So when it at the glomerular level, your excuse me, the content of your ultrafiltrate, that sodium is filtered through this glomerulus along with your water. So the content is when it reaches the glomerulus is high. So the most of the absorption is takes place in your proximal convoluted tubule, that is 70 to 80% of sodium is reabsorbed from your PCT, and it is followed by your passive water reabsorption. In the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle, around 20 to 30% of your sodium is reabsorbed. However, there is no water reabsorption in this area, so there is this makes your urine dilute. In the distal convoluted tubule, when the urine reaches the distal convoluted tubules, there are aldosterone sensitive sodium potassium ATPase channels where we can have an absorption of 5 to 10% depending upon your whether the aldosterone has stimulated these channels. And then in the collecting duct we have this ADH receptor sensitive ADH sensitive aquaporin channels where we can have a passive reabsorption of water in the collecting duct. Here the sodium is not absorbed. So when the final urine is formed and which is excreted, you have a lesser quantity around 20 to 30 millimole per day, and water around 1 to 2 liters per day. So this is how from 100 to 200 millimoles per day of sodium, there's a reabsorption of sodium and water at various levels in your renal tubules, and then finally the urine is produced. So this is very important mechanism, and urinary sodium concentration and urinary osmolality, as we can see in the subsequent slides, we will be able to know that this urine acts as a window of your water balance in the body, and your sodium and the volume of your body water in your, it can act as a window to know how your water balance is going in your body, and how your sodiums are and the urinary sodium can act as a window to your sodium disturbances, and you can interpret how in what conditions the urinary sodium or urinary osmolality changes. We'll see it in the subsequent slides. So the another mechanism is the osmoreceptor based sodium regulation. So whenever there is a disturbance in your homeostasis, that is, suppose your sodium is increased in your extracellular fluid, the osmoreceptors are stimulated, and there is an increased thirst and increased ADH release, which leads to decreased water loss and increased water gain, which dilutes your ECH, and volume increases, and your homeostasis is restored. Opposite occurs when there is a decrease in your sodium concentration in your extracellular fluid. The osmoreceptors are inhibited, which leads to decrease in your ADH release and decreased thirst, and increased water loss from your urine, and decreased water gain. Again, this leads to contraction of your extracellular fluid volume, and the homeostasis is further restored. Coming to this renin-angiotensin based homeostasis, this is another mechanism. Renin-aldosterone angiotensin based sodium homeostasis. Whenever there is a dehydration or a release which leads to reduced renal perfusion, there is a release of renin, which converts your angiotensin 1, and which is further converted to angiotensin 2, and this releases aldosterone, and which causes sodium reabsorption in your distal convoluted tubule, which leads to low urine sodium and increased plasma osmolality, and further restoring your volume status. The role of vasopressin is again in response to dehydration, which leads to hypernatremia and increased osmolality, and dehydration will also lead to reduced blood pressures, and both of these will act as a stimulus for release of your antidiuretic hormone, which will lead to reduced renal water loss, and again your volume status will be restored, and there will be formation of concentrated urine. A word about the role of atrial natriuretic peptide. ANP is a hormone which is produced by specific cells of cardiac atria in response to your blood volume expansion, and it inhibits the reabsorption of sodium and water by the renal tubules, which in turn increases the urinary excretion and helps to return the blood volume back towards normal. And it has it exerts a negative regulation against ADH in central nervous system. So all of this will help in returning your volume status to the normal. Now coming to the specific disorders. So first we'll discuss about hyponatremia. Classically, it is defined as a decrease in plasma sodium concentration below 135 millimoles per liter. So the normal value is around 135 to 145 millimole per liter, and it can be classified based on lab values from mild, moderate, and severe, with mild varying from 130 to 135, moderate between 125 to 129, and severe less than 125. We can classify also on the basis of duration of occurrence or duration of development of hyponatremia, with acute being less than or equal to 48 hours, and chronic is more than 48 hours. So hyponatremia, the main causes is either because of increased volume of your extracellular fluid, which we can see in cases such as congestive cardiac failure, cirrhosis, nephrotic syndrome, renal failure, and pregnancy, or excessive water intake. These can be seen in primary polydipsia, or when we use diluted formula feedings, or plain water enema, excessive use of plain water enema. Then there are certain drugs which are associated with hyponatremia, mainly the ADH analogs, vasopressin, desmopressin, and oxytocin. And then there are antidepressant and antipsychotic and anti-seizures drugs like anti-epileptics, like which stimulates the release of ADH, like carbamazepine, chlorpheniramine, and then vincristine, vinblastine, certain narcotics. Then there are drugs which enhance the effect of ADH on kidneys, like NSAIDs, chlorpheniramine, and cyclophosphamide. So this history has to be taken whether the patient is on certain drugs which can lead to hyponatremia. A word about syndrome of inappropriate ADH secretion. It is basically a diagnosis of exclusion, and there are various multiple causes in which this syndrome can occur, and it is very common to see. Certain carcinomas like bronchogenic, gastrointestinal, bladder, prostate, and pancreas. In pulmonary etiology, pneumonia, any type of pneumonia, viral, bacterial, tubercular, pulmonary abscess, aspergillosis. And in central nervous system, like encephalitis, meningitis, tumors, abscesses, and hemorrhage. So in all these conditions, there is excessive secretion of your antidiuretic hormone, and consequently, there is a development of hyponatremia. So the diagnostic criteria for SIDH is you have hyponatremia less than 135 millimole per liter of serum sodium, decreased serum osmolality, which is around less than 270, and then your urinary sodium will still be more than 20 millimole per liter, and there is an inappropriate urine concentration with urine osmolality of more than 100 millimoles per kg, and we have to exclude the causes of renal failure and other endocrine dysfunction. And coming to the manifestation of hyponatremia, the clinical features depends mainly on your degree of change and acuteness of change. So how much sodium has dropped and how rapidly it has dropped. So the manifestation will depend upon that. So in cases of acute hyponatremia, with your moderate decrease in your serum sodium, the manifestations are mainly nausea and malaise. But however, with severe depletion of sodium, you can have headache, lethargy, obtundation, seizures, coma, and respiratory arrest. In chronic hyponatremia, the most of the time, because the brain has adapted to your chronic hyponatremia, so most of the time they might be asymptomatic, but subtle features like fatigue, nausea, dizziness, gait disturbances, forgetfulness, and confusion and lethargy can occur. So this acuteness will also determine your management, like how rapidly you should correct and how slowly you should correct rather than rapidly. About the management, there is this was a clinical practice guideline on diagnosis and treatment of hyponatremia given by European Society of Intensive Care Medicine and European Society of Endocrinology, European Society of Renal Association, European Dialysis and Transplant Association, and also European Renal Best Practice Guidelines. So they have given certain recommendation that how you should go about treating hyponatremia. So before that, we will just go through the algorithm, what are the steps in diagnosis and management. So whenever you encountered hyponatremia, you exclude hyperglycemia and other causes of non-hyponatremia. And once you confirm excluded these causes, you have to see whether there are acute or severe symptoms. If any of these symptoms are present, then you consider immediate treatment with hypertonic saline. If these symptoms are not present, then you check for the urinary osmolality. If your urine is less osmolar, that is, it is more dilute than with osmolality of less than 100 millimole per kg, these are your primary consideration, like primary polydipsia, or there is a low sodium intake, or beer potomania. This is basically when people drink beer without eating anything, and then they can have this kind of problems. And then if your urine osmolality is more than 100 milliosmolar per kg, then you measure your urine sodium concentration. If it is less than 30, that means there is a low effective arterial blood volume. And if then you see whether your intravascular volume or extracellular fluid is expanded, then these are the reasons of heart failure, liver cirrhosis, and nephrotic syndrome. If your intravascular volume is reduced, then this is basically diarrhea, vomiting, or third spacing in such as severe sepsis, and remote use of diuretics. If it is more than 30 millimole per liter, then it can be either because of your primary renal failure or use of diuretics. And if it is these things are not present, then again you have to see in whether your extracellular fluid volume is reduced. Then the vomiting, primary adrenal insufficiency, renal salt wasting, cerebral salt wasting, and occult diuretic use can be there. If your extracellular fluid is volume is normal, then syndrome of inappropriate ADS secretion, hypothyroidism, secondary adrenal insufficiency, and again occult diuretic use must be ruled out. Coming to the management, if there are severe symptoms in the first hour, in acute cases, you have to rapidly increase your serum sodium to a safe level. So around 100 to 150 ml of 3% hypertonic saline must be given if patient is seizing or there are other features of acute manifestations of hyponatremia. And also you should check your serum sodium concentration after 20 minutes, and you don't wait to report to come. You simultaneously again repeat the 3% hypertonic saline for next 20 minutes till your symptoms are abated, or at least your target of 5 millimole per liter increase in sodium concentration is achieved, or it reaches a serum sodium of 130 millimole per liter, whichever is earlier. So this patient should be managed in an environment where you can have a close clinical and biochemical monitoring. If there is an improvement, then you have to stop the rapid infusion of hypertonic saline, and then you try to find out what is the reason for hyponatremia, and then you keep the line open by giving smallest feasible volume of normal saline until you have this cause specific treatment, and then you start your investigation about what is the reason for this hyponatremia. One thing you have to remember that you have to limit the increase in serum concentration to a total of 10 millimole per liter during the first 24 hours, and then 8 millimole per liter during every 24 hours until your serum sodium reaches 130. But for acute thing, you have to treat it rapidly. And also you should check your serum sodium concentration 6 to 12 hours and daily thereafter, once till it reaches normal. If there is no improvement to your hypertonic saline infusion, then you start continuing an IV infusion of 3% hypertonic saline, aiming for additional 1 millimole per liter per hour increase in sodium concentration. And you have to stop this hypertonic saline when the symptoms improve or the serum sodium concentration increases 10 millimole per liter in total, or serum sodium reaches 130 below, whichever occurs first. And again, you have to go for additional diagnostic exploration for the reasons of symptoms other than hyponatremia. Also, in these cases, if there is no improvement, you will monitor more frequently, maybe every 4 hourly, as long as your hypertonic saline is going on. So this was about rate of correction, and many of the times we do not know how much to give and how to give. So then this is a formula which is Adriomedia's formula. We'll be seeing in the examples for hyponatremia in the later part. So this formula is basically will tell you the estimate of 1 liter of any infusate on your serum sodium, or in 1 liter of any infusate which is containing sodium and potassium on your serum sodium. So whatever change in serum sodium you want, if you can put it in this formula, you will know what fluid to be given and how much to be given and over how much period of time. We'll see in the examples in later on. So this is just to show the content of sodium in millimoles per liter. The highest is in your 5% sodium chloride, but in practically we routinely use 3%, and we haven't used 5% yet. And the lowest is obviously the dextrose, which has no content of sodium. The drug management of hyponatremia, the pharmacological agents, demeclocycline and lithium, there are no definite recommendations. But the use of AVP receptor antagonists, frequently called aquaretics, the conivaptan, tolvaptan, and lixivaptan, it blocks the effect of elevated AVP and promote aquaresis. And it also does the electrolyte sparing. It also excretes the electrolyte sparing excretion of water. It enhances it and also have intrinsic neuroprotective effects. The most dreaded complication of hyponatremia or inappropriate correction of hyponatremia is on the brain. And in this diagram, it is just shown the effect of hyponatremia and its correction on the brain. So when in the normal brain, the osmolality of the cells is maintained in a normal range. So what happens whenever there is a acute hypotonic state, immediately the water moves from CSF to there is a water gain in intracellularly, and so there is a water gain which leads to low osmolality, and the rapid adaptation includes the loss of sodium, potassium, chloride. However, it is followed by the slow adaptation with the help of loss of organic osmolytes. And here, if you because in chronic state there is low osmolality which is happening because of loss of your organic osmolytes. So if you give improper therapy, that is, if you correct this chronic hypotonic state by rapidly infusing saline, then there is a chance of osmotic demyelination. Therefore, we have to correct it slowly, specifically in the chronic cases, which will restore your brain osmolality to the normal. So this is the graded complication. So the key messages for hyponatremia is to treat vigorously if symptomatic, to reach a safe level. Assess the clinical profile of the patient in totality. Do not correct more than 8 to 10 millicoulombs in 24 hours. And depending upon your plasma sodium, you have to monitor very frequently, maybe 2 to 4 hourly in acute cases to guide your therapy. So coming to hypernatremia, where your serum sodium is more than 145 millimoles per liter, and severe hypernatremia is usually more than 155 to 160 millimole per liter, and hypernatremia is always a state of hypertonicity. So hypernatremia has been seen in around in critical care illnesses. It is very frequently seen, and it has been found that in medical ICU the frequency prevalence varies from 6 to 26%, and in surgical ICU around 4 to 10%. And it is associated with high morbidity and mortality, with as high as around 70% if untreated. So this is just a repetition that we have already seen that increase in plasma sodium leads to increased osmolality and activation of osmoreceptors in hypothalamus, which releases ADH and stimulates thirst. And this leads to decreased loss of water from the kidneys and increase intake, and leads to normalization of plasma sodium. So this slide is important in the sense that if we understand this, then the cause and the treatment is clear to us about the hypernatremia. So what happens during intracellular fluid and extracellular fluid during hypernatremic states? So these open circles are basically sodium, and these solid circles are potassium. This is extracellular and intracellular. So we know that the 60% of total body water is in intracellular compartment and around 40% in the extracellular fluid. So in normal conditions, the homeostasis is maintained. So what happens when there is a hypernatremia? When there is only pure water loss, for example, in cases of diabetes insipidus. So in this case, there is a proportionate decrease in your extracellular fluid volume as well as intracellular fluid volume, because once there is a pure water loss, first the extracellular volume fluid compartment shrinks, and then there is a shift of water from intracellular to extracellular fluids. So this will lead to normalization of your extracellular volume. However, there is a proportionate decrease in your intracellular fluid volume consequently. So there is actually, if there is a pure water loss, there is a proportionate decrease in your extracellular as well as intracellular fluid volume. If there is a hypotonic sodium loss, that means your free water is also getting lost along with your sodium as well. For example, in cases where there is a vomiting, so in these cases your extracellular fluid volume loss is more than your intracellular volume loss. So the sodium actual content, if you see, the dots are less, but then their volume loss is so much that the concentration of hypernatremia is less. So even the sodium is losing. Sorry. Can you mute? So in hypotonic sodium loss, along with water, your sodium is also getting. So, but the amount of water loss from extracellular fluid is more than as compared to your intracellular fluid volume. What happens when there is a hypotonic sodium and potassium loss? For example, in cases with osmotic diuresis or use of diuretics, where your potassium is also getting lost along with your sodium. So in that cases, again, yours both the volumes are reduced, and in that cases, your intracellular volume is also further reduced. In cases where there is a hypernatremia due to hypertonic sodium gain, that is from hypertonic sodium bicarbonate infusion or excess salt intake. So what happens, there is a net gain of sodium in your extracellular fluid volume, and therefore this ECF volume increases as compared to, but the ICF volume decreases. So if you know that these conditions, the reason for identifying it, the cause or what is the reason for hypernatremia will be clear. So this is just a table to show various sodium content of various fluids, and you commonly use antibiotics. So one of the reasons for hypernatremia can be the use of antibiotics, and one should also look into it if you are not finding any other cause for hypernatremia. So what are the consequences? Hypernatremia leads to a state of hyperosmolality, and it has effect on multiple organs in your body. In your heart, it can lead to decreased left ventricular contractility. In lungs, it will lead to hyperventilation. In your liver, it can lead to disturbed glucose utilization and impaired gluconeogenesis. It can cause cramps and rhabdomyolysis in your muscles. And the most dreaded complication is seen in your brain, where it can lead to cerebral shrinkage with the risk of vascular rupture and leading to restlessness, headache, coma, seizures. So these clinical features are more commonly seen in patients with altered mental status, intubated patients, infants, and elderly patients. And often the signs of dehydration is difficult to assess because the extracellular compartment will, the body will try to maintain your extracellular fluid volume will be uh, try to maintain it. So you cannot really, your skin will be darky, and you cannot really assess the signs of dehydration based just on your external appearance. So the CNS adaptive responses are mainly can be divided into acute and chronic. So again, if with the immediate effect of hypertonic state in brain is water loss, which leads to high osmolality in your brain cells, and the rapid adaptation is basically by the cells uptake and the intracellular the sodium and potassium shifts from extracellular to intracellular fluid by active uptake of the brain cells. So there is the accumulation of high electrolytes, and leads to again high osmolality, and then the slow adaptation is there is a generation of organic osmolytes, and which will lead to movement of your water from your CSF to your extracellular fluid. So if we correct this hypotonic state rapidly, then there is a chances of cerebral edema, which can further lead to your herniation syndromes, and therefore we have to correct it very slowly, so to maintain your osmolality of brain back to normal. So workup, usually the cause is clear from the history, and you really do not require any major workup. And if the cause is clear, then you can do further tests based on specific etiology. You have to see your daily intake and output, along with your urine osmolality, serum osmolality, urine electrolytes. Then urine osmolality further will lead to, if we do urine osmolality, it can point to certain diagnosis that if there is a low urine osmolality, that is less than 300 milliosmol per liter, then the reasons can be central or nephrogenic diabetes insipidus. In the intermediate case, if that is like 300 to 600, can be because of osmotic diuresis, again central and nephrogenic diabetes insipidus to be ruled out. And in cases with high osmolality of urine, then you have to consider hypotonic fluid loss with urine sodium less than 25 millimoles per liter, and less commonly the sodium gain. So coming to the management mainly depends upon the treatment of the underlying cause, and any modifiable contributing factors or reversible barriers to water excess to be prevented. And correcting the hypertonicity is basically depend upon the rate of development of your hypernatremia and severity. Volume status, fluid resuscitation with isotonic saline if the patient is hypovolemic, and diuretics and renal replacement if hypervolemic. And again, the treatment of underlying cause, like specific therapy for your diabetes insipidus in the central or nephrogenic. Then, depending upon the rate of development of hypernatremia, your rate of correction will be determined by this. So, acute is mainly if it develops rapidly, less than 24 hours, you can use rapid rate for correction, and 1 millimole per liter per hour at maximal. You can go up to 12 millimole per liter per day. In chronic cases, slower rate has to be used in order to prevent development of cerebral edema, the maximum of 10 millimole per liter per day. So classically, what we use is free water deficit, which is the amount of water needed to return your sodium concentration to 140 to 145. So free water deficit is calculated by this formula, which is the current total body water into serum sodium 140, or you can take 145 minus 1. So how to estimate the total body water? In young men, it is around 60% of lean body weight, and in young women around 50%. The corresponding value for elderly men and women are 50 and 45% respectively. So most of the patients are usually water depleted. Hence, we use, for the calculation purpose, we take 10% less total body water. For example, what is the estimated water deficit of an elderly, that 60 kg man with a serum sodium concentration of 168 millimoles per liter, okay, considering a case of chronic hypernatremia and pure free water loss. So we assume 10% less, so we take total body water as 40% of body weight. So if we calculate by this formula, it comes around 4 liter. Goal is to decrease 10 millimoles per liter per day and not more than 0.5 millimoles per liter per hour. So deficit is around 28 millicalories, so you have to transfer it over 56 to 65 hours with around 4.8 liters of free water. And this is in addition to your maintenance fluid. So roughly it comes around 1.5 to 2 times your maintenance fluid. And this is how in practical sense we charge free water in patients with hypernatremia. What are the problems? Though it adequately estimates pure free water loss, it underestimates deficit in patients with hypotonic fluid loss. That means If your electrolytes are also getting lost, then this formula may not be completely reliable because it does not account for any sodium or potassium. So this is what this formula can be used for correction of both hypo and hypernatremia. The Medeiros formula, which shows you the effect of 1 liter of your fluid on your serum sodium change. So this is what we have already seen. Again, this is the various common fluid contents. So if we take the example using this formula, what will be the appropriate rate of your 5% dextrose for an elderly man with weight of 60 kg and sodium of 168? Again, chronic hypernatremia and assuming no ongoing loss. So you can see here your change in serum sodium will be, if you are using free water dextrose, then it will be infused sodium will be 0, serum sodium will be 168, total body water again 0.4 into 60 plus 1, so it comes around 6.1 liter of your D5 water will decrease your sodium by around 6.67 millimoles per liter. However, your goal is to decrease by 10 millimoles in 24 hours. So if you do the calculation, around 1.5 liters of your dextrose water is required in 24 hours to reduce your serum sodium. The problems with this formula is that it does not account for ongoing losses. So ongoing losses has to be replaced as they occur. And the formula might underestimate the change in serum sodium, which is achieved by infusion in some cases. And the best is to start with 50 to 75% of the rate, which is calculated by this formula, and they perform a lab sodium after 2 hours and titrate the rate. Continuing monitoring is very important. Formulas are just estimates. Without monitoring, you cannot titrate your therapy. So monitor vitals, electrolytes, intake output is must. Acute hypernatremia, serum sodium, you have to monitor more frequently, maybe 1 to 2 hourly. In chronic, 4 to 6 hours, and later once stabilized, you can do it 8 hourly. If there occurs accidental too rapid correction of hypernatremia and with imminent neurological symptoms, it can be you have to re-induce hypernatremia by infusion of hypertonic saline. This can happen if you rapidly correct hypernatremia and patient starts seizing. Then you have to see that you have to further increase your sodium by infusion of hypertonic saline. So this can happen, and you have to keep it in mind. So in the end, this is the basically brain is what is the major organ and major morbidity that can occur with your changes in plasma sodium concentration. So this picture depicts that both rapid onset and rapid correction of hypo and hypernatremia can cause brain damage. A rapid increase in the level of serum sodium, either from acute hypernatremia or from rapid correction of chronic hyponatremia, can cause osmotic demyelination. Again, reverse for the rapid decrease in plasma sodium concentration because of rapid onset of acute hyponatremia or rapid correction of chronic hypernatremia can lead to your cerebral edema and further uncal herniation and leading to morbidity and mortality. So for hypernatremia, it is commonly seen and it is associated with increased mortality and morbidity. And prompt identification of cause and correction is of utmost importance, and rate of development determines the rate of fluid therapy. Frequent monitoring is key to successful management for both the disorders. So, thank you.